People, if you're in the room, you go, oh, great, we're talking about marriages. This is for everybody. I can promise you this. How many people in this room believe or have noticed that marriages struggle today? For whatever reason, marriages struggle. It's finances, it's kids, it's intimacy, something like that. Something happens, expectations aren't met, and marriages tend to struggle. And so we want to talk about how to invest in a godly way into marriages. And so that's what we're dealing with for these next 4 weeks, and it works out perfect. We have Steve and Debbie Wilson coming in, kicking off our conference this weekend with My Marriage Matters. And so this is the perfect time for this. And the truth is this: marriages are struggling, and God has something so much better for us than we can even expect. I think a lot of us, we have low expectations. When we go into marriage, we don't set the bar high enough. Either because we haven't seen successful marriages, or we've seen some that were frustrating, or maybe that were unhealthy. And so because of that, we don't set the bar high enough of what a marriage should be. So hearing this, how many of you in this room today, ladies, stick with me here, ladies, you grew up dreaming about being married? You grew up and you had this, this perfect fairy tale, this dream that you're Prince Charming. You knew what the wedding would look like. You knew what the cake would look like. You already had names picked out for your kids. You knew, you remember playing the little game as a kid, and you're like the MASH, and you're like, you do this thing, you're like, oh, I'm going to be a medical doctor, and we're going to be a millionaire, and we're going to have 1,400 kids, and you remember that? Yeah. So you had these expectations going into marriage. You had this dream, and then men, where are you at? Men, I think your dreams of marriage as a teenager were much different than ladies' dreams of marriage. Men were like, oh man, sex twice a day, it's gonna be amazing, it's gonna be crazy. Now I wanna talk to both sides of the coin. How many of you are still dreaming? How many of you got to this point and you're like, marriage is nothing like I thought it was gonna be? We got to this point and you're like, wow, I think somebody should have told me how this man smelled. Where was that in premarital counseling? And then men wake up with their wife the first time, and you're like, oh. What happened to your hair and your eyelashes? And what's down in your face? I'm just talking truth here. Just truth. Expectations aren't always met. And there's more to marriage, men, than just lust. I thought there would be some ladies that would like that. I just thought that would be a point that I'm going to rewrite that one. But here's the thing. So often marriages don't meet expectations. Here's a fact. Unfortunately, this is a fact. 50% of marriages don't make it. 50% of marriages don't make it. And that amazes me, that knowing the statistics going into marriage, that 50% of marriages don't make it. If the risk was that high for anything else in our life, we would do something to prepare for it. If we knew that every time we got into a car, that there was a 50% chance that your child would not make it through the trip, we would do something to prepare for that. You'd be putting helmets on your kids. They'd be wearing life jackets, vests. They'd be having I don't know, you'd be filling that thing with foam. I don't know what you would do. But if that was the case, you would take preventative measures. You would do something to prepare for that. But when it comes to marriage, it's something like, we'll just wing it. We'll just figure that out. Premarriage, we don't need anything. We're just going to figure that out, man, because love wins. Love is enough. Love will keep it together. That's just love. And of the marriages that do make it, so you had the 50% that don't make it, and of the 50% that do make it, I have the right to speak on this topic. If there's anything that I can speak on, everybody calls me when their marriage is going wrong. And I'm glad about that. I'm happy when people call me about that. I'm not dogging that. Don't ever think that, oh great, Shane doesn't want us to call him. But I can promise you, I get the phone call. I get the text from wife, hey, my husband this. Hey, Shane, can we sit down and talk? I can tell you that of the marriages that don't collapse, many of the marriages that haven't collapsed, they're sadly miserable. They're struggling. Now, I'm not saying that for everybody. I hope that as you sit in this room, you're offended because you look at your spouse and you go, not us. Not today, Satan, right? I like your shirt, Crystal. But you look at that and you say, no, that's not us, but there's a truth to this. Of those that do, so many of them are miserable. And if there was a chance for failure in any other area of your life, we would prepare and do something to eliminate the danger. If something wasn't working, we would do something about it. We would take care of it. We would prepare. We would do something to fix that. And so here's what happens. A lot of people, when they go into marriage, they're not spiritually equipped to have a marriage that honors God. So many people going into marriage are not equipped to have a marriage that honors God. And that's a spiritual thing. Man, we can work on our body. I see men like, can I just tell you a true story? Before Julie and I got married, and I don't know why this is, because we dated from the time I was 15 to like, we got married when I was 23. But I thought for the marriage, I need to be in shape. I need to be in shape for the wedding. I got to be in shape. And so I had some friends, and I was getting up at 5:30 in the morning, and I was running, and I was doing weight training, and I was doing everything that I could. And then as it got close to the wedding, I started taking some supplements because like I needed to be in peak physical condition. Man, do you know where I'm going with this? And so I can remember I took this supplement. It was called Zenadrine. And it might as well have been called Zenadrain. There was a morning that as I was preparing for the big day, December 14th, to marry that woman right there. You have to tell me the year. I don't know, yeah. I know we've been married 15 years, so I got that part. So take care of the 2004, 5, 3, 2. I've only been married once, though. I remember that. But I can remember I'm getting up, and I'm in the middle of this run. It's 5:30 in the morning. Like my friend Wade's out there with me, and he's like in shape, and I'm always following him. And so Wade always leaves me. And then I could not have been like any more at the half point on the run. Like any more. I couldn't have been further away from our starting point, and I couldn't have been the worst spot in the world. And I'm running that walking track over on 15th Street. You know what I'm talking about? The track. 5:30 in the morning. And how many of you know that when you get on that track, there are no trees that are that cover you? And so I'm running on this track, and all of a sudden I'm like, Wade, and he's gone. I'm alone, like just nothing. Like I'm just out there alone, and it hits me. Like I took the Zenadrine before I started my run, and I get to the halfway point, and all of a sudden something starts gurgling. And something starts bubbling, and there's something churning inside of me, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. There's no bathrooms on that trail. There's no trees on that trail. It's 5:30 in the morning. There's nowhere to go. Well, they've got those little landscaping plots where they put the little Christmas lights and the little and there's bushes. And I told you I got married in December, so there's no trees that have leaves. There's no bushes that have leaves. So I have to go find a spot. And Zenadrine became Zenadrain. And I'm not kidding you. I was a youth pastor at that time, and right at that point, one of the ladies that was a parent of one of my youth is walking that track. 5:30 in the morning, I'm like, if this doesn't show you that God has a sense of humor, I don't know what does. Because I can promise you God was looking down going, oh my gosh, this is good. Come here, watch this. Watch this. But oh my gosh, it was so bad. But my point is this, I was doing everything I could to physically prepare for the marriage. But what do we do to spiritually prepare for marriage? We think about all the things. I hear this all the time. I want to wait until we can afford to have a baby. We can't afford to get married right now, so we think about the financial aspects. We think about ladies, men. Don't get me wrong, I love my wife. We love our wives, but there's something they never look better than they do on their wedding day. There's just something about that, ladies, man. Something happens. We just get ready and we're perfect. I mean, there's something about that. But what do we do spiritually to equip ourselves to have a marriage that honors God? Is a great marriage possible? Is it possible? I hope that there's some people in this room that say absolutely, emphatically, yes. But with the path that culture has set marriage on, it's unlikely. because of the expectations, because of the challenges, because of the interferences, because of the noise. And so that's exactly what we want to talk about in these next few weeks in this series, The Vow. And there's 4 vows that I want us to talk about. And today, the first vow that I want us to discover is this, the vow of priority. The vow of priority. We've talked about priority these last few weeks. We've talked about what that looks like. And I talked about how it annoys me when people say that they need your priorities straight. You can only have one priority. And so we're going to talk about that. And then here next week, we're going to next time we get together for this series, we're going to look at the vow of pursuit. And this is a fun topic, the vow of pursuit. How to pursue your partner after you have them. Because I think so often we will do everything, man, we love the challenge, we love the hunt, we love that. But once we have conquered, once we have gotten what we were after, do we still pursue? Are we still trying to win our bride? Are we still trying to go after our spouse? And then we're going to look at the vow of partnership. What it means to have a covenant and not a contract. What it means to have leadership and submission, what that looks like. And then last week is the vow of purity. Because there's something that lacks in a marriage. You might be looking at that thinking, well, you're married. You're married. Purity doesn't have to exist anymore. Purity is something before the wedding, right? That's what you're waiting on. But there's something about purity. Wherever secrecy lives, intimacy dies. Wherever secrecy lives, intimacy dies. And so that's what we're looking at these next few weeks. And so today we open up with this thought of the vow of priority. And there's a common belief, there's this idea that life won't be fulfilled. We grow up with this expectation that one day we dream about, we pray about, that one day we would find the one. The one. Do you remember when you saw that one that when you saw her, when you saw him, the hair stood up on the back of your neck, your palms sweated? When you kissed, you did this thing like, what is that? Did you pop? But that happens when you find the one. There's a song, and when that song plays, it makes you think of them. You think of their smell, and it makes you happy. Do you remember what that was like? There's some people in here going, no, I don't remember. I don't know that I'm not sure that I love you. Like, no, don't. That's not where I'm trying to take this at all. I'm not trying to take this there at all. But here's the thing. A lot of us, we look for the one. And ladies, I think the standard gets dropped. I think we've had so many of the none that when we think we found the one, we look at him and we're like, oh, he's employed. He doesn't play video games 24 hours a day. He doesn't live in his parents' basement. I found the one. And men were like, she said yes. I got to a second date. It's the one. It's the one. But I would implore us to think of it this way. Instead of finding the one, is this, that we would find the two. Yes, that we would find the two. And what does that mean? How can you find the two? Shane, you've told me not to bring anything else in the relationship. I don't know that this is healthy. But if we would find the two, the vow of priority, this, that God would be your one and your spouse would be your two. You see, there's something about that puts you in the right order. God is a God of order. And when we find that He is our one, He leads us to our two. Even Jesus said this when He was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Love the spouse with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind? No. Love your girlfriend with all your heart? No. Love your kids with all your heart? No. Who does He say to love with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, with all of our strength? Who? Love your God. And so when we don't have our order correct, we have not put ourselves in an opportunity, we've not put ourselves in a situation, a circumstance where we can succeed. We have to love our God with all of our heart. Has to be God first and people next. And I want to ask you this with people in the room right now. How many of you in this room that you're not married right now, but you're looking to be married someday? Raise your hand if you're not married now, but you're looking to be married someday. All right, single people, here's your opportunity. Look around. This is opportunity. Okay? You're not always going to get this. But if you're looking to be married someday, if you're hoping to marry, I want you to think of this, that I will seek the one while preparing for my two. I will seek the one while preparing for my two. It's the story of a girl that she grew up a Christian girl, had her priorities straight, and then she got to college, and she went off the deep end, which so often happens. Gets into partying, gets into drinking really bad, starts experimenting with drugs, starts following the crowd, doesn't have her own 2 feet to stand on. And then she goes to an event and she finds this guy that she thinks is the one. He's just perfect. And she calls her mom and she says, Mom, I found the greatest guy in the world. He's a Christian. He loves God. He loves his family. He loves his mom. He's got goals. He wants to be a lawyer someday, and he wants to be, I know to be a Christian and a lawyer, it's a weird thing, but I know. So she calls her mom and she says, he's the perfect one. And her mom lays some truth on her and she says, honey, I don't know how to tell you this, but if he is everything that you say that he is, then you're not who he's looking for. If he's everything that you say that he is, then you can't possibly be who he is looking for. You're not the godly girl that he has prepared for in his life, if he's who you say he is. Andy Stanley has this quote that he drops, says, become the person that you are looking for is looking for. Become the person that you are looking for is looking for. And we have to have it in our heads that God is preparing me for someone that I can serve him with. And so when you think that you have found the one, when you think that you have found the person that God has destined you for, are you the person that God has destined them for? What are you doing in your life to become the person that you're looking for is looking for? And that's where this vow of priority comes into place. I promise that God will be my first priority and my spouse will be my second. And this is something that we struggle with in marriages because we develop these child-centric marriages where everything, for the first few years, like, oh, we love our spouse and that's all there is. And then kids come along and something happens and priority shifts and we put all of our focus on our kids. And here's the truth about kids. You rent them. They're only going to be a priority in your life for 18 years unless you have a millennial. If you have a millennial, you're going to have them till they're 30 or 40, okay? And I promise you, there are millennials in the room that are offended right now that are living in their parents' basement. That are still living with their parents, like, oh my gosh, they can't say that about millennials. I did. But that God would be my first priority. My spouse would be my second. And this comes from Genesis 2. You see, Adam was alone. He didn't have a suitable helper. So what does God do? God comes along and he says, it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for him to be alone. Ladies, how many of you know that it's not good for your husband to be alone? Yes. They spend things they don't need to spend. They eat things they definitely should not eat. They do things that they shouldn't do, and so God sees that Adam is alone, and he didn't have a suitable helper. And so God put him into a deep sleep, and he took a rib from his side, and he formed a woman. And then man woke up, and he said, whoa, man. That was good, wasn't it? But God saw that he was alone. But there's something about right here in Genesis 2. He says, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. And when you look at this scripture here in Genesis, it talks about the man leaving his father and mother. God's still a priority, but he says he leaves his father and mother because there's something about children. When we're children, our priority, the prioritized relationship for us, it's our parents. Because we rely on them for everything. We rely on them for food, for protection, for nourishment, for direction, for education, for leadership. We rely on our parents for that. And so that becomes the most important relationship in our life. But there becomes a point where man leaves his father and mother. He leaves his father and mother and is united with his wife. It doesn't say he's united with his man. It says he's united with his wife. And that can be offensive. You may not like that, but that's the Bible. That's not my opinion, but that's what it says. It says he leaves his father and mother, and the two become one flesh. And there's the root word in this. When it says leaves, the root word is a Hebrew word. And that word is azab. Azab. Remember those old commercials? Azab. Azab. No, okay, sorry, it's bad. But he would leave his father and mother. And this word leaves means this. In the Hebrew, it means this: to loosen or relinquish. To loosen or relinquish. And so growing up, our priority is our parents. Growing up, our priority would be them. But then we leave. We let go of. We relinquish that relationship. And then we move on. And when we move on to a spouse, when we move on to being married, our priority must not be our spouse, but it must be God. That God would be our number one, that our spouse would be our number two. Because if we put our spouse as the number one relationship, the number one priority in our life, we have asked our spouse to do something that they can't possibly do. We've set them into a position of failure. We've put them into a situation that was meant for God. And although I love Julie, and she's amazing, and she's delightful, and she's wonderful, and she's everything I ever prayed for and dreamed of, yes, it's true, she is. She is not meant to be my priority. God is my priority. And when I put her in that position, I have put her in a place where she is going to fail because I've asked her to do something that she cannot. Because you see what happens when we put our spouses in a situation where they can be idolized, we eventually demonize them. Because know this, if you haven't done it already because you've been married like 24 hours, you're going to let your spouse down. I can promise you that. That's a whole nother series. Julie could stand up here all day and talk to you about where I have fallen short. That's just the truth. And if we put our spouses in a position where we idolize them, we've put them in a situation where we can demonize them. Think about this. Before you get married, ladies, you meet this guy and you're like, oh, he's so wonderful. He's so laid back. He's so easygoing. He's so easy to be around. He's just perfect. And then you get married and he's no longer laid back and easygoing. He's lazy. And men, we see that girl and we look at her and we're like, oh my gosh, I've never met a girl so focused. She's so driven. She knows what she wants. She goes after it. She takes charge. And then you get married. You know what that becomes? She's so controlling. All she does is nag at me all the time. Because if we put them in a situation where we idolize them, we put them in a situation where we'll one day demonize them. And that's what happens right here. You know? And we can put our marriages and our relationships where they should be early on in the relationship. We date. We pursue. And when we're first married, they're our priority. And then a kid comes along, and all of a sudden, because there's a kid there, there's no time for God. There's no time for each other. There's no time for an identity in your career and your image. Everything is about your kids. That's why moms wear mom jeans. That's where the bun came from, the messy bun. Because everything is devoted to your kids. And all you want to do if you're not giving every square inch of your house and every second of your day to your kids, the only other thing you want to do is sleep. And I can speak on this. I have 3 daughters. I know what that's like. And something happens when our kids come along that everything goes into our kids. But I can tell you this, that when we get to our deathbed, in that point in our life, all of a sudden, God and family become important. No one gets to their deathbed and says things like this: man, I wish I'd had more likes on Facebook. I wish that more people would have followed me on Twitter. No one gets to their deathbed and says anything like this. No one says, I wish we would have put that granite in the kitchen. I wish that we would have had taller ceilings in the house. All of those things all of a sudden don't matter because priority has re-entered the picture. When priority is out of order in your marriage, though, it can never be what it's designed to be. When our priorities in our marriage are out of order, because remember, talking about God is a God of order, our marriages can never be what they were designed to be. And I can remember when Julie and I got together, when we were first married, We had some struggle. Before the kids came along, Julie's wonderful. It had nothing to do with her. It was me. We struggled. I worked all the time. I worked all the time. And not because it never felt like a job to me. I love what I did, and I just worked all the time. And I would get phone calls, are you coming home yet? What are you doing? Are you coming home? And then we would get in arguments because I wasn't doing anything bad, and I would remember justifying what I would do, and I'd be like, I could be doing a lot worse things. You need to get off my back because, I'm doing good things. Why would you get on to me about working? And then I had a really good mentor in my life that spoke in my life. And he shared this perspective with me. Because something I didn't understand was that Julie had become jealous. And when we think of jealousy, we think right away that it's a bad thing. And jealousy is always a bad thing. But Julie had become jealous of my time. And the things that I was devoting my time to, it was getting the best of me. It was getting my joy. And it was robbing intimacy in our relationship between us. And then it would cause struggle, it would cause frustration. And then our marriage struggled because Julie had become jealous for something that I thought she shouldn't be jealous over. And I had this really good mentor that said, you know what, you might as well be in a relationship with somebody else. He didn't say do that, but he said in her eyes, she began to demonize. And then a baby comes along. And then it goes the opposite direction. When the baby came along, when Libby came along, man, Julie's an amazing mother, and I can't tell you, there's nothing more that I like to, she is amazing. She's in her wheelhouse as a mom. She's amazing. But when the baby came along, all of a sudden, all of her time, all of her heart went to the baby. And again, it's just the exact same thing. Here I am getting jealous over the baby. And how can I get mad at that? Because it's a good thing, Shane. She needs to be a good mom. She has to be there for the mom. There's some things that only she can give the baby, but I find myself being jealous of her time. I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's something I remember vividly. And so this is something that happened. And I didn't understand that there was legitimate jealousy. And most of us think of jealousy as always being a bad thing, like anger, but it's not true because the Bible says that our God is a jealous God. He says that our God is a jealous God and that He wants to be first and that His jealousy is legitimate. Because here's the truth, in the order of the relationship, I should always come before the kids in our relationship. Julie should always come before the kids in our relationship. That priority has to exist. But beyond that, there's some things in our life that we put priority in. I know there's people in this room today that you're jealous of your spouse's phone because it gets priority. It gets priority in bed at night. It gets priority in your free time. It gets priority in conversations. It gets priority. And so it's an inanimate object that has caused jealousy. And we find jealousy maybe over hobbies. We find jealousy maybe over fishing, over hunting, over work. We get jealous over many things. And these are things that destroy many marriages, and they aren't necessarily bad things. Sometimes we might think it foolish to go in and say, I need to talk to somebody because, man, the phone has become such a distraction in our marriage. Because, man, the spending has become such a distraction in our marriage, or whatever, the things that are a distraction. And you see, good things that are not prioritized correctly become bad things. Good things that are not prioritized correctly become bad things. And here's one big thought I want us to have is this. We have to protect the priorities. I'm specifically talking to men right here. Men in the room. We have to protect the priorities. If you plan on ever getting married, you have to do this. You have to understand what it means to first put God as the priority in your marriage, then your spouse. Because I can tell you this, when people come to me with a struggling marriage, it doesn't take long to trace it back to the root of the problem, that things are out of order. I can have husbands that come in and say, oh, you know what, intimacy just doesn't exist in our marriage. We never have time together anymore. And then the wife will tell me what's going on, and you can trace it back. The priorities are out of order. Things aren't where they're supposed to be, and it puts everything in a disbalance. But as I was saying earlier, children come along, they're a temporary assignment, you have them for 18 years, but marriage is a lifetime commitment. Your spouse has to be a priority. Do you know that the 25-year mark in a marriage is one of the highest percentages for a divorce rate? 25 years. Because that's around the time when statistically most kids are leaving the house. They're going off to college, and marriages have been so focused on kids, that when the kids are no longer there, people wonder why they're married. They look at each other and they think, why was it that we were married again? I don't remember, because all it's been for the last 25 years is kids. And when that's gone, what do we need us for anymore? Because things are out of order. Because things are out of order. I want to invite my wife to the stage here for just a minute. And I want her to share. You hear from me all the time, so do me a favor. Welcome my wife up to the stage. Behind every good man is a better woman. That's exactly what I told you. Because if I'd have said that, you wouldn't have done it. My wife hates to speak, but here's one thing I do know. If you don't know Julie, everyone always has preconceived notions about Julie. Like, oh man, she's stern, she's a principal. But you don't understand is the part that I get to know. She's funny. She's sensitive. She's thoughtful. She's caring. But Julie, what would you say for you, how, as a mom, as a principal, as a pastor's wife, as a wife, how do you put God as a priority in your life?
I think the biggest thing is having to be intentional with it. I just had this conversation with a lady this week about how time is such a huge issue. And so my biggest thing is making sure that it's a priority, that spending time, that is the very first thing I do when I wake up. I go into my bathroom, and I have a big bathroom, but that's where I spend my time before Shane gets out of bed, before the kids get out of bed. But if I don't do that, then I don't find time for it, or I seem to not find time.
How do you balance that? Because, you've got 3 kids, and then you've got 450 kids, and then you've got 100 kids, and then you've got me. How do you balance all that?
I would say the biggest thing is just knowing that I can't do it all myself. I know for anybody that works for me or works with me knows that I know that it's a team effort, and I can't do anything by myself. And same with here at church, the ladies ministry, we talk about that. We can't do it all ourselves. And so, but also saying no to things is a big thing. And that's a hard thing that I've had to figure out, is saying no, that there's some things that I just can't do.
There's a lot of husbands that just tuned you out because there's wives going, honey, she said, say no. Other things. You didn't mean me, did you? Yeah. Oh. All right. Thank you. Give it up for Julie. So often we want our children to have a successful marriage. We want our kids to have a good marriage, but something that we have to do is we have to model what that looks like for our kids. We can't expect our kids to have something that we don't have. And so we have to be willing to put our kids in a marriage, in a family, where we are modeling what they should be doing. And so dads, I put this back on you. How are you modeling what a successful marriage should look like? How are you modeling what a relationship with God should look like? Are you the ones that are putting it in priority, saying, hey, this Sunday, we're going to be at church. This Wednesday, we're going to be at Awana. Hey, we're going to go serve together as a family. We're going to do something. What are you doing, men, to put that as the priority in your family, that God is number one? It's not her job. It's not her job. And more often than not, that's the way it sits, is that the women have been put into that situation to lead when they're not supposed to lead. God has put you into that place. And so many of us have hurting relationships in this room because we've tried to put our spouses in a place where God is supposed to be. And men, it's easy for us. We have this natural desire to protect. Man, if someone's breaking into my house, I've got the plan. I've got the safe next to the bed with the gun. I've got strategically things, shurikens, throwing stars, bow staffs, nunchucks, all over the house. You will not sneak up on me in my house anywhere where I cannot reach something to defend what's important to me. I have to put it all above 5 feet because of my kids. But you know what that's like? That's easy for us. That's easy for us as men because that's how we're programmed, to protect. That's easy for us. It's difficult for us, though. We say, I would die for my family. I would die fighting for them. I would die protecting my family. That's easy. But it's difficult to live the same way. Think about that when you get to that point when you're on your deathbed and your children talk about you. How will they talk about you? Well, Dad really loved his team. Dad really loved his hobbies. I think he loved Mom. I never really heard him say it much. God, well, I know that we talked about him at Easter and Christmas, and he would get drug along, but I don't ever really remember it being a priority to him. What would they say? What would they say was your priority in your life? Your role is to protect the priorities. Everything within your power to lay down your life for two things, Christ and your spouse. Ephesians 5:25 says this, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. That means that you would pray for your spouse. That means that you would live for your spouse. That means that you would get into the Word. That means that you would pursue your spouse. We're going to talk about that later on in the series. But man, here's the thing. What does that look like for you? When's the last time you dated? When's the last time you pursued your spouse? When's the last time you did something unexpected? When's the last time you did something that made her go, what got into you? And a lot of you may be saying, well, you know what, Shane, we're just in this period of life where we just can't afford that. That's not true. Because I can remember when I was dating Julie, I've never been broker in my life. Is that a word, broker? It is a word, but I don't think it's correct in that one, like a stockbroker. But I've never more broke. You know what I'm trying to say. But man, you've got to get creative. You've got a backyard. Get a tent. There's cheap hotels out there. I can tell you this is God's honest truth. No, I better not say that. I'll get a stern talking to from my wife later. But know this, it's easy to make excuses for things in your life. But when there's something that's truly a priority, you do anything to go after it. When something is a priority, you do anything to go after it. And that's when love wins. That's when love makes a way. So know this, I promise that today, let this be what you walk away with this today, is that I would promise that God will be my first priority and that my spouse will be my second. And then when I do this, this is when I have the opportunity to be fulfilled in life. When I put God as my first priority and my spouse as my second. When I put God on the throne where he belongs and I worship him there, it's amazing what the overflow looks like. And so there's so many people that hate the thought of the submission. Wives, submit to your husbands. If that offends you, if that bothers you, then the priority in your relationship is not where it should be. Because husbands, if your priority was as it should be, that should be such an honor for your wife to submit because you would love her as Christ loved the church, because Christ died for the church. Christ gave everything that he had for the church. I think it's more offensive when we're not in that priority. Excuse me. And we've put ourselves in a circumstance or situation where that is something that would be deemed offensive. Because for my wife to submit to me is because I'm in an act of submission to God. And when that submission, it's not about bondage. It's not about slavery. It's not about any of that. It's about love and connecting. It's about serving. So for us to be fulfilled in life, we have to find the number one, God, and that our spouse will be number two. And we have to be willing to protect those priorities at any cost. Let's pray.